Thank you for joining us today for the first event in our Scales of Justice series of programs, focusing on questions of ethics, religion, and the law. Professor Doron Kalir is a clinical professor at Marshall College of Law, CSU. He runs the appellate clinic and he also teaches courses in legal ethics, federal courts, and contracts. As a clinical professor, together with his students, Professor Kalir has been representing underprivileged clients, both individuals and organizations, before state, federal, and immigration courts at all levels, from a municipal court in Defiance, Ohio, to the United States Supreme Court. Professor Kalir's scholarship focuses on statutory interpretation, federal courts, LGBTQ rights, and Jewish law. Professor Kalir is a volunteer lecturer at B'nai Jeshurun Congregation, where he frequently teaches a lesson on the portion of the week. He is also a board member at the Cleveland chapters of Hillel Jewish Students Organization, the Anti-Defamation League, and the American Constitutional Society. He is also a member of the Academic Engagement Network, where he is on the Speakers Bureau. Professor Kalir was born and raised in Israel, where he completed a full military service before attending law school at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He later studied and taught the LLM program at Columbia University in New York and worked in private practice for several years before moving to Cleveland. And now, please join me in welcoming him to the virtual stage.
Thank you so much, Emma. It's such a pleasure to be here. I hope you can all see and hear me. My name is Doron Kalir, and I will have the pleasure and honor to share the next hour with you and my thoughts about Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her Jewish identity as reflected by her work. I was very timid approaching this lecture because I didn't know much about that aspect of her judicial work. I admired Justice Bader Ginsburg from afar. I had the pleasure of meeting her twice, once in an AALS, that's the Law School Association meeting, and once on the bench. I actually saw her. And these two times that I've seen her, I could not get enough of her. She's really diminutive. She's much smaller in real life than you can even imagine, but she commands such a gigantic presence. And she always speaks before or in front of captive audiences who are dying to hear every word she can say. One more personal experience that I have was that I worked for 2 years at Columbia Law School. I taught the LLM program, and in order to do that, I had to interview with Jane Ginsburg, her daughter. And more than she interviewing me, I, who just came from Israel, just arrived, I could not get enough of asking her what it's like to be the daughter of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She didn't like it that much, for sure, but I was like, I couldn't believe that I'm that close to that legendary justice who, of course, whose name was well recognized in Israel. She was very good friends with Chief Justice Barak of the Israeli Supreme Court, and she was well known. Anyway, let us begin. First, I want to relate to one point that was mentioned. I don't know how many of you were in the opening lecture here about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the notorious RBG. And at one point it was mentioned that not a single New York City firm to which she applied offered her a position because she had 3 strikes against her. And these were her being a Jew, a woman, and a mother to boot. And I thought, and I discussed it with Emma in the preliminary conversation here, that these 3 strikes became 3 home runs. Now Ruth Bader Ginsburg is an idol to every young mother, to every Jewish person, and of course to all the women that are now just celebrating International Women's Month. And I think that she is indeed a role model, and it's so beautiful that during her lifetime, those 3 strikes you're out metaphor have become such a great success for her, and I'm very happy for that. One thing that the RBG, the notorious RBG exhibition, does not reveal, for those of you who will visit there, is the fact that while it is true that RBG was denied a Harvard Law School degree when she graduated because of the male chauvinist pigs dean at the time, she was fortunate enough, and she graduated from my school, from Columbia Law School. Of course, she made the law review there, and she taught there, and now Jane, her daughter, teaches there. Much later in her life, after she was confirmed to the United States Supreme Court in 2011, Harvard Law School made the 180 degrees admission, realizing that they should provide Ruth Bader Ginsburg a law degree. But who gave her the law degree? The woman who gave her the law degree was the new dean of Harvard Law School, the first female dean of Harvard Law School, and the first Jewish female dean of Harvard Law School, Yelena Kagan, which of course now sits on the Supreme Court and had the honor and pleasure of sharing a bench with Ruth Bader Ginsburg for several years. So just think about how beautiful that was in terms of closing a circle. She did not receive the law degree from Harvard. She was one of 9 students there. And now at that time when she receives the degree, Harvard is 50-50 split in terms of gender admission. The dean is female, the dean is Jewish. By all means, thanks to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. They would never have a female Jewish dean if it weren't for Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And she now grants Ruth Bader Ginsburg her honorary degree from HLS, from Harvard Law School. And then of course, ascends herself to the United States Supreme Court, where Ruth Bader Ginsburg famously said that she will be satisfied only if and when 9 women will sit there. So I just thought those 2 points, the 3 strikes you're out, and I became 3 home runs, and never getting a law degree from Harvard. She did eventually in 2011 from a Jewish female dean. All right, to my lecture today. In big strokes, my lecture today contradicts the perception of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's Jewish identity in her work with what I revealed to be quite the opposite. So the perception, to remind everybody, those of you who visited the exhibition and those who just know about it, is that there's not much to RBG's Jewish identity at her work. After her mom dies, to which she was very, very close, she was refused a place in the minyan. That's the 10 men that has to say the Kaddish, the traditional prayer of the dead. And once she was denied that, she felt that it's a great affront to her mom, not only to herself, that she's not allowed to be within that crowd. And she forever disavowed, traditional Judaism. And since then, she was Jewish by name, more or less. That's the perception. After spending 3 weeks, literally with her books, with her decision, with her opinions, with her writings, I can tell you that the truth could not be further away. Ruth Bader Ginsburg has been a Jewish giant throughout her career, through and through. And I want to start just by mentioning Pirkei Avot 4:22. It's the wisdom of our fathers, who suggested, I apologize for the Hebrew. There will be a lot of Hebrew today, but I promise I will immediately translate. Al kochacha tanolad ve'al kochacha tachai ve'al kochacha tamet. It is despite your will that you're being brought to this world. It is despite your will that you attend this world, and it's despite your will that you leave this world. And so sometimes, or many a time, we're doing things despite our will. I think that Jewish wisdom poured out of RBG, whether she intended it or not, whether she wanted it or not. She was a Jewish giant. And I hope that by the end of my lecture today, you would feel the same. So let's start with the breadcrumbs, and only then we'll ascend to the grand picture. Usually we start with the forest and move to the trees. I want to start with the breadcrumbs. So the first breadcrumb that we have is tzedek, tzedek tirdof, this justice, justice, you shall pursue, the sign that was over in her chambers in Hebrew, but never mentioned in any of her opinion. In her book, this is a book in her own words, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she explains a little bit about this sign. And here's what she said. The security I felt as a Jewish person in the United States Supreme Court is shown by the command from Deuteronomy displayed in the artwork in Hebrew letters on 3 walls and a table in my chambers. Tzedek, tzedek tirdof. Justice, justice shall you pursue. These artworks proclaim they are ever-present reminders of what judges must do so they may thrive. There is also a large silver mezuzah mounted on my doorpost. And she says, Jews in the United States, I mean to convey, today, face only few closed doors and do not fear letting the world know who we are. A question stated in various ways, so indicative of large advances made. What is the difference within a New York City garment district bookkeeper and a Supreme Court justice, 1 generation. So that's the first breadcrumb, the sign on our door. The second is the opinion in Shelby County versus Holder. You might remember from last week or the big lecture or from general knowledge that that was a decision by the United States Supreme Court in 2013, striking down or gutting down basically the Voting Rights Act of 1965, one of the greatest achievements of the civil rights movement. And in that opinion, Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote a very impressive dissent where she wrote, among other things, that throwing out the protections afforded by the Voting Rights Act is just like throwing away your umbrella in the midst of a rainstorm only because you're not feeling wet. In that opinion, she cites Martin Luther King famous saying that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. That's very well known, and she cites MLK for saying that. But just before citing that, she adds a curious sentence. Here's what she said. But there had to be a steadfast national commitment to see the task through to completion. Again, but there had to be a steadfast national commitment to see the task through to completion. She doesn't cite any source for that or authority. She just mentions that in passing. And I looked it up and I was like, why is she saying that there must be a steadfast national commitment to see the work through to completion? And I found it in Pirkei Avot, again, the words of the wise, the wisdom, B16, again, apologizing for the Hebrew. Here, Rabbi Tarfon היה אומר, לא עליך למלאכה לגמור ולא אתה בן חורין להיבטל ממנה. He, Rabbi Tarfon, used to say, it is not up to you to see the task through completion, but neither are you at liberty to entirely disregard it. Meaning, the rabbi said, you can't just say, I'm not going to do anything because the task is huge. It's too overwhelming for me to complete it. So it's not up to you to complete it, but you have to take a stand towards it. And in Ruth Bader Ginsburg's words, it's even better. It must be a steadfast national commitment to see the task through. Again, not citing Pirkei Avot, not citing the wisdom, but still definitely a breadcrumb. Will, if you can allow me to share my screen, because now I can't, that would be great. The next thing that we'll have, hopefully, is from the movie RBG, the documentary. It now features on Hulu for free. So please feel free to watch that.
You know, my brother and cousins and I'll call her Bubby. It's a Yiddish word for grandmother. It's what we've always called Bubby. Bubby?
Oh, yes.
Do you know if you have fake sugar like Splenda or Sweet and Low?
Yes, it should be someplace.
That's helpful. I feel like I have my grandmotherly relationship with her, but also somewhat of a student and scholarly relationship to her as well now. She taught me that the way to win an argument is not to yell, because often that will turn people away more so than bringing them to your table. I don't know what that says.
So here's the Ruth Bader Ginsburg tip on how to win your argument. Bring people to the table, don't scream, because otherwise that will turn away people rather than bring them to your side. Where did she get that? Again, we don't know. And I'm just, a detective following the breadcrumbs. But in Kohelet 9:17, we find that words of the wise shall be heard gently. Divrei chachamim b'nachat nishma'im. When you sound an argument, you better be very gentle and you better be kind rather than scream at people and lecture at them. Just converse with them and explain that to them. And that wisdom she bequeathed to her granddaughter, telling her, do you want to win an argument? Be quiet and be gentle and be kind to others. Don't overpower them and they will listen to you. They will come to your side, which of course is a trick she herself, Justice Ginsburg, used many a time in her own life. All right, these are just breadcrumbs. I want to now go through the history of Ruth Bader Ginsburg as a Jewish justice, and to see how her upbringing and her Jewish identity influenced her opinions, not only the breadcrumbs, but the actual opinions of the Supreme Court. And so we start, we're going to move back and forth in time. We start in 1993, right after she's nominated to the Supreme Court. She gives a lecture to a Jewish organization, say, I am a judge, born, raised, and proud of being a Jew. The demand for justice runs through the entirety of Jewish history and Jewish tradition. She does identify the Jewish theme of justice throughout her work, but just like in any other realm of her doing, she does it her own way. She doesn't follow the traditional ways, and she definitely doesn't follow the Rabbanim, the old dead men of Jewish tradition, but she charts her own path of justice and pursuit of justice under the principle of Judaism. Now, to understand her Jewish upbringing, again, I'm going to use words from her own book, describing her early childhood, which the RBG, the notorious RBG exhibition, starts just a bit later. So this is from her really formative earlier times. Although Ruth's immediate family was not devoutly religious, Jewish traditions were very much a part of her childhood. Her mother, Celia, lit candles every Friday night, and at Chanukah, all the grandchildren gather around to receive the Chanukah gelt. Most importantly, young Ruth really loved the Seders, where she could be, as the youngest present, ask the kushiyot, the 4 questions, and why is this night different from all nights? She remembers fondly that was her favorite part. From childhood onward, Ruth especially valued the reverence for justice and learning that was part of the Jewish heritage. She enjoyed studying Hebrew and the history of the Jews, and was especially moved by the life of Dvorah, or the prophet Devorah, who was both a judge, a prophet, and a general, and recounted in the book of Judges. At the same time, from the very young age, attention started to reveal with what she saw as sometimes rigid and adherence to seemingly hypocritical rules that granted an inferior role to women. For example, one of her stories that she found very frustrating was her mom, Celia, telling her that her brother worked very hard for the entire summer to buy himself a used bicycle. And then he was so proud to ride them, but unfortunately he rode them on Shabbat, which turns her dad, Celia's dad, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg's grandfather to angrily erupt and destroy the brand new bicycle that he got. They're used, but for him, the brand new pair, just because he rode them on Shabbat. Similarly, she was very upset when her cousin Richard got to have a bar mitzvah at 13, but she was denied the right to do so. By the way, again, as a footnote, Yelena Kagan, when she heard about that, now justice in the Supreme Court, she told the rabbi in her shul, I'll be the first to have a bar mitzvah. I don't care that I'm a girl, I will have my own bar mitzvah. Ruth attended various synagogues during her childhood, from a Reform one to an Orthodox one, finally settling on a conservative temple, the East Meadwood Jewish Center. There she spent Sunday mornings learning about Jewish history, holidays, and ceremonies, and that's where I suspect she has all this background and knowledge in Pirkei Avot and in the Mishnah and in the Torah. And then in what seems today is a prophetic address, at the age of 13, she wrote something for Rabbi Stephen Weiss, who was at the time 75 years old, and she wanted to congratulate him for his birthday. And she wrote how he was a champion of every righteous cause. Jews and Gentiles alike came to hear him. He was a valiant fighter for women's suffrage and among the first American Zionism. This could be equally said about Ruth Bader Ginsburg herself. And so that was the history that led her to grade school. As you all know, if you were in the opening lecture or in the exhibit, as Ruth were entering high school, her mom was diagnosed with cancer, and 2 days before her graduation, and she was slated to speak again, of course, as the valedictorian. Her mom passed away, and Ruth never delivered that speech, but also was not allowed to participate in the minyan and to say Kaddish on her own mom, which again, she saw as a big affront to her mom, not only to herself. And she vowed that she will never be a part of the organized religion in Judaism. Many years later, Ruth Bader Ginsburg in 1993 is confirmed to the Supreme Court. She's not the first Jewish person on the Supreme Court. There was Justice Brandeis. She's not the first woman on the Supreme Court, but she's the first Jewish woman on the Supreme Court. And as she is confirmed, they have those hearings, as you know, and in her opening statement, in her opening paragraph, she mentions her Jewish identity. And this is what she says. I am, as you know, from my questionnaire that I presented already, I was born and bred a first generation American on my father's side, barely second generation on my mother's. Neither of my parents had the means to attend college, but both taught me to love learning, to care about people, and to work hard for whatever I wanted to and believed in. Their parents had the foresight to leave the old country when Jewish ancestry and faith meant exposure to pogroms and the denigration of one's human's worth. The denigration of one's human worth. What has become of me could only happen in America. Like so many others, I owe so much to the entry that this nation has afforded to people yearning to breathe free. And so she mentions the pogroms and the idea of human dignity and the idea of human equality already in her opening statement. But then Senator Kennedy asked her to expand about her Jewish identity, and this is the answer she gave Senator Kennedy during the judicial hearing, the nomination for the United States Supreme Court. Senator Kennedy, I am alert to discrimination. I grew up during World War II in a Jewish family. I have memories as a child, even before the war, of being in a car with my parents and passing a place in Pennsylvania, a resort with a sign out front that read, "No dogs and Jews allowed." Signs of that kind existed in the country during my childhood. One couldn't help but be sensitive to discrimination living in a Jew in America at the time of World War II. And so this idea of being an American, but also being an outsider in her own country is something that really spoke to Justice Ginsburg, and the idea that she needs to correct that somehow. The notion that is upon her to complete that mission was something that I think she pursued vigorously throughout her entire life. And indeed, behind the scene, Justice Ginsburg worked tirelessly to make sure that Jews will not feel so excluded, even in little things. For example, in the Supreme Court, and I was admitted to the Supreme Court of the United States as well. I argued before the Israeli Supreme Court too. It says, it's an option now, thanks to her, but it says, you've been admitted to the court in the year 2003, to the year of our Lord, in big, bold letters. And some Jewish attorneys took offense to that, saying, that's not our year of our Lord. And so now, thanks to her, thanks to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, if you are admitted to the Supreme Court, you can have that language optional. You can just say in the year 2003. Also, Ruth Bader Ginsburg made sure that the Supreme Court will not hear cases on Yom Kippur. And later on in her life, in 2018, she received the Genesis $1 million prize for a Jewish leader of Jewish thought. And of course, she donated the proceeds to various Jewish charities. And finally, in 2015, she was asked to write a portion of the Haggadah. And just like the good justice that she is, she focused on all the outcast women that are not mentioned in the Haggadah, such as the women who were marginalized, such as the daughter of Pharaoh, Moshe's sister Miriam, the midwives Shifra and Puah, and she wrote her entire entry on those people who are not mentioned in the Haggadah, as if to say, yes, you guys continue to read your traditional text, but there are women who participated in that, And if it weren't for them, we will never have a Haggadah. And so this is a bit of the history of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I want to suggest in the next few minutes before I finish, the largest theme of her own judicial work, which are not breadcrumbs, which I think also stem primarily from her Jewish identity. And this is equality to all, equality to women or equal treatment of women, and finally, the idea of the importance of dissenting opinion. So let me start off with equality to all. As a justice, she was dedicated to the equality of many minority groups in this society. Where does that come from? In Judaism, there's this huge principle of mishpat echad yeh lachem, lager ve'laezrach. It's in Leviticus 22, 24, and it says, one law, you shall have, both the immigrant among you and the citizen among you. And so Ruth Bader Ginsburg thought that, just a second. Ruth Bader Ginsburg saw that equality for everyone is a primary principle that she has to practice. So in 2013, 2 years before the court recognized same-sex marriage, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was the first Supreme Court justice to officiate over same-sex marriage. She started in New York, as you can see here, and she went all over in DC and other places where she married same-sex couples before the court acknowledged that as a legal right. I can't emphasize enough how trailblazing that is, to realize the right to love and to right to marry of whomever you want. She did that, and she not only spoke about it, but actually officiated marriage ceremonies. And that is something that is very, very important. In 2018, she gave, in that respect, this idea of equality to all. In 2018, she gave an interview to the Daily Forward, and she was asked about that. And she said that being a Jew is having a place in society in which you're always reminded that you're an outsider, even when, as a Supreme Court justice, you can be considered of the ultimate insider. That memory of that, she said, even if it's more from the past, informed me that I should, that society should be doing more to protect other minorities. So as a Jewish justice, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg thought that treatment of minority as equals is a central theme of her opinion. The second thing that she does is, of course, equal rights of women, to which she dedicated her entire professional life, both as an attorney and as a Supreme Court justice. So here, I want to mention the VMI opinion, of course, the Virginia Military Institute. The name of the case is United States versus Virginia. And for those of us who would love to see this case and to read it for bombastic declaration of equality and how important women are, you can search in vain. Justice Bader Ginsburg was always very cautious. You have to be very cautious when you're sitting on trial. That's another order from earlier Mishnah Judaism. She was very reserved, and both her briefs and later on her opinion of the court are devoid of those kind of Kennedy-esque grand, majestic declaration. It's the opinion is very technical and explains that the VMI didn't provide a justification that is proper in the eyes of the law to prevent women from coming in, and therefore women should come in. But again, breadcrumbs. If you look as a detective, if you look for something, you find footnote 20 in the opinion. I don't know how many people even noticed that there were more than 20 footnotes. And here's footnote 20 in the opinion. Virginia's prime concern, it appears, is that placing men and women into the adversarial relationship inherent in the VMI program would destroy, at least for that period of the adversarial system, any sense of decency that still permeates the relationship between the sexes. That's what they said. It is an ancient and familiar fear. Compare 1875 case denying female applicants motion for admission to the bar of its court. Wisconsin Supreme Court explained, discussion are habitually necessary in courts of justice, which are unfit for female ears. The habitual presence of women at these would tend to relax the public sense of decency and propriety. Compare that with the closing argument in 1988 presentation at the 8th Circuit Judicial Conference in Colorado, which says, Plato questioned whether women should be afforded equal opportunity to become guardians, those elite rulers of Platonic society. Ironically, in that most undemocratic system of government, the Republic's women's native ability to serve as guardians was not ever questioned. The concern was over the wrestling and exercise class in which all candidates for guardianship had to participate for rigorous physically and mental training and were prerequisites to attain the exalted status of a guardian. And in accord with the Greek custom, those exercises classes were conducted in the nude. Plato concluded that their virtue would clothe the women's nakedness and that Platonic society would not thereby be deprived of the talent of qualified citizen for the reasons of mere gender. And she adds in her typical dry language, for Plato's full text, see this and that, Virginia, not bound by ancient Greek custom, meaning they don't need to do it in the nude, in its rigorous physical and mental training programs could more readily make the accommodation necessary to draw on this talent of all qualified citizens. I think that this footnote, more than the entire opinion, which is very long and technical, as I said, shows, of course, the breadth and depth of the justice knowledge of women's rights running all the way from Plato through history, but also how she tells the litigants basically in 1996 in the United States, don't tell me this. We saw that 2,000 years ago. We heard the same arguments 2,000 years ago, and we shouldn't have listened then, and we're definitely not going to listen now. Now, how all that relates to Judaism, how is women's equality even resembles Judaism? As some of you may know, at least in the Orthodox tradition, women are not always treated as equals, and women are not always accorded the same rights and privileges that are accorded to males, such as rabbis and Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the yeshivas, and so on and so forth. Well, not if you really read the text. So if you study the Torah, as I'm sure Ruth Bader did on her own, and you read Genesis 8:27, you read Zachar u'nekeva bara otam, right after God creates this human. It says specifically, Zachar v'nekeva bara otam, male and female, he created them, and he blessed them. Be fruitful and multiply, and so on and so forth. The idea of equality is inherent in the biblical text. This idea that men and women were born together, blessed together, and then deprived of all the rights of Gan Eden, the heaven, together, is a very basic Jewish idea that was later contorted and twisted a million times by male rabbis over the years, but is now finally coming back, I think, to where it should be with conservative movement, with reform movement. But the idea of Jewish equality and the equal between the genders is apparent right there in Genesis 8:27. And I think that Ruth read those verses as declaring that there shouldn't be any difference in attitude towards men and women. And that's where her life's mission is, as you all know from the movies and hopefully from the exhibit. And finally, so as I said, there are three themes to her work: treating the other, treating all minorities as equal, treating women as equal and give them equal treatment under the laws, and finally, this idea of dissenting opinion. What are dissenting opinions? And so in the Mishnah, the Jewish code that was written after the Torah was completed, hundreds of years after actually, there is this revolutionary, brand new idea that doesn't appear in any code of law prior to that. Not in Code Hammurabi, and not in the Justinian Code, and not in any ancient world code, and that is preserving the opinion of the dissent, preserving the opinion of those who were against the opinion of the court, of those who thought differently, who wrote separately. That was a mind-blowing idea. Why in the legal code would you preserve the idea of someone who disagrees with a majority? Why would you even do that? Clearly, that's not the law. And by virtue of mentioning that, you somehow, one would think, undermine the authoritative weight of the majority. Like, why would you even let someone do that? And indeed, Professor Moshe Halbertal, who now teaches in the Hebrew U and at NYU Law, writes about that. He talks about the very fact that it was a worldwide, innovation, maintaining the dissenting opinion on paper. And then he asks why? Why would they do it? And he says, there has been over the years a lot of controversy of why to maintain the dissent. And one thing is that a future Beit Din, a future court, can change its mind based on that dissenting opinion, that right now the majority is A, but if there is a minority opinion, a dissenting opinion, a future court can lean on that opinion to change its mind. Also, it's important for the next generations to see that even back then, even when, let's take an example, the Supreme Court dreadful opinion of Plessy versus Ferguson in 1893, where the court said that there is this notion of separate but equal. There is a Justice Harlan dissent saying, no, there's no such thing as separate but equal. If it's separate, then it's not equal. So the second reason then that Moshe Halbertal mentioned is that even for the next generations, to remind them that even at the time, although the opinion now seems to us totally ignorant and unjust, there were some people who objected to that. And most of all, it tells us, says Moshe Halbertal, that the law is a living, breathing thing. So today the opinion is A, but tomorrow it can change to B. And by maintaining the dissenting opinion, we can keep that tension between the law today and the law tomorrow. And so Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote an entire article called The Role of Dissenting Opinion. And I will finish with that. She starts the article in her regular dry manner by saying, the remarks I have prepared today concern the role of dissenting opinions in the United States judicial system. This is something that I have to think about more than occasionally in recent terms. That's such a Ruth Bader Ginsburg claim, saying that the controversy that tore this country apart, the Voting Rights Act and abortion and equality of women, and she goes, more than occasionally in recent terms. And so without reading Halbertal, but with reading the halacha, she talks about the reasons why there are any dissenting opinion. And she first suggests that there is a utility of dissenting opinion in-house, meaning within the Supreme Court. So she said, this opinion that she wrote about the VMI that she was so proud of, it was better off because Justice Scalia was on the dissent, and he required her to elevate the level of her majority opinion so much more and several times that she had to rewrite it. Then she writes that there are external impact of dissenting opinion, not only in-house, but external impact. And here she cites Chief Justice Hughes, who famously said, a dissent in the court of last resort is an appeal to the intelligence of a future day when a later decision may possibly correct the error into which the dissenting judge believes the court to have been betrayed. This is word for word Moshe Halbertal's and basically the halacha's view of dissenting opinion, an appeal to the intelligence of future generation. And she gives several examples here. And of course, it's only by other judges. But finally, again, typical undertone and humility, she comes to her own work. And this is where I want to close today. Here's what she writes. Another genre of dissenting aims to attract immediate public attention and thereby to propel legislative change. A fit example, I think, is my dissent in the Lilly Ledbetter case. It was 2007. Ledbetter worked as an area manager at Goodyear's tire plant in Alabama. In 1997, she was the only woman Goodyear employed in such a post. Her starting salary in 1979 was in line with the salaries of other men, but over time, her pay slipped. By the end of 1997, about 20 years later, there was a 15 to 40% disparity between her own pay and the salaries of her 15 male counterparts. A federal jury found it more likely than not that Goodyear paid Ledbetter an equal salary because of her sex. The Supreme Court nullified that verdict. It was Justice Sam Alito, holding that Ledbetter filed her claim too late. Now, in this opinion, I would like to suggest all of her work life is coming to a head, and her Jewish identity. This idea of equality of the other, this idea of equal treatment of women, this idea of dissenting opinion, because she wrote it in dissent, and she literally exploded on the majority. Justice Alito, who's claimed later, worked his entire life on the federal bench and in the DOJ, the Department of Justice. He never knew this idea of pay disparity because when you're a public official, the salary is directed by the rank that you are on the salary. Let's say SG 13 or SG 17. It has nothing to do with your gender. But this is not like this in real life. And Justice Ginsburg tells him that. She tells him that, I'm sorry, Justice Alito, you have no idea what's happening in the real world. Lilly Ledbetter never knew or could have known that she's getting less than men because the men didn't come forward and told her, haha, you're getting much less than us. And so as soon as she discovered that, she turned to the EEOC, never mind what that is for now. And she claimed that she's getting less, but the court said, you were late, you were not within the 180 days. So Ruth Bader Ginsburg writes a dissenting opinion about that and aims it at Congress. She said, Congress, can you correct the law? And indeed, within days, both the House and then the Senate passed a bill. And in his first act as a president, President Obama in 2009, invites Lilly Ledbetter to the White House and signed the Lilly Ledbetter Protection Act, Payment Protection Act, that guarantees women and men equal pay, or if not, allows women to file even years later, as long as they have just learned about the disparity in payment. All that, again, comes from an idea of dissenting opinion and how important it is to voice your opinion, even if you're writing separately for the court. For within those three things, the equality for all, the equal treatment of women, and the dissenting opinion, I believe that Justice Bader Ginsburg was a huge Jewish figure, and she exercised that every day in her professional life. And with that, I will conclude and will be more than happy to hear some questions. Emma?
Thank you so much, Doron. Thank you for that wonderful talk. And so for everybody in the audience, if you have any further questions for Doron, you can send them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, or feel free to send them over chat to all panelists and I can ask them for you. So Doron, to get started with our first question, I want to come back to Rabbi Tarfon's words. You are not required to finish your work, yet neither are you permitted to desist from it. For me, this quote brings to mind a lot of RBG. It brings to mind for me RBG's steadfast determination to hold her seat on the Supreme Court for as long as possible. What other examples would you point to in RBG's career that speak to this value?
I think that the very fact that she cited it in her dissent, like she felt compelled to put it in the annal of the United States opinion, speaks a lot to how much she believed in that. And she thought it takes a village to move on from her own leadership to others. So this is so typical of her. When she talks in her confirmation hearing, even in a confirmation hearing about herself, she immediately turns to and I quote, "Indeed, in my lifetime, I expect to see 3, 4, perhaps even 5 women on the high court bench, women not shaped from the same mold, but of different complexions. I'm sorry. This is unbelievable. Like, she's right. She's now the first Jewish woman on the court, one of 2 women on the court, and she envisions a court with 3, 4, 5 women in her lifetime. And indeed, if you think of Elena Kagan and Justice Sotomayor and now Amy Coney Barrett, they're all on the Supreme Court much thanks to her. So I think this idea of I'm leading, but I'm going to be the first, but definitely not the last. With VMI, that opinion about the Virginia Military Institute, she came 20 years later to Virginia Military Institute to give a lecture and took a picture with 20 female cadets. Again, showing that she just blazed the way, but it's not up for her, it's everybody else. And so this, I think she exercised in almost everything she did, this idea that you're not completing it alone, but with others, the work will get to fruition. And I just love that she always practiced what she preached. She came back to Harvard and she got the degree from a female dean who's a Jewish, and with 50% female students in the audience going crazy over every word she said. The same is true every time she came to Columbia Law School. I think she was such a trailblazer that a lot of women and men were inspired by her persistence, by her hardship, and this idea that nothing can stand in my way if I really, really want to do it. I just want to add a short rabbinical story. So it's legendary how few hours a night Ruth Bader Ginsburg slept during her Harvard Law Review years. She had to take care of her own, which is the most, rigorous and challenging law school in the world. She had to take care of her little baby, Jane, and then she had to take care of her own husband. All this at the same time, and there were only 24 hours a day. And she famously said, 2 or 3 hours a night is definitely enough. Now, again, I don't think she knew that at the time, but there is Hasidic and rabbinical legends about the rabbis who would prevent sleep from themselves by putting their legs in cold water just so they can learn the Torah another hour and won't fall asleep. And I think that again, she's really trailblazing in this idea of Jewish identity of, if you need to work 22 hours a day, you will work 22 hours a day. And that's why she never let a clerk of her tell her, I think this is too much work. She said, I can't hear those words. I'm sorry. There's no such thing as too much work. I know something about that. So yeah. Did I answer you? I'm sorry. I don't even know if all this blurred even answer you.
I think you definitely answered me. And what's more, you gave me some great advice on how to get less sleep while I'm in grad school. So very, very helpful. I have another question for you that actually I think segues really nicely, but absolutely, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is an incredible role model to so many women, myself included. But listening to you talk, I was also curious about the women who were role models to her, particularly the example you gave us of Deborah. And so I know from my own reading that at one point, Ginsburg compared the legacy of Deborah to that of the civil rights attorney, Pauli Murray, who was a trailblazer in the way that she thought about how we can use the law to guarantee equal rights for all, and that RBG was actually quoted Pauli Murray in a lot of her own legal writings. And so I'm curious for you, because Deborah clearly is such a figure of inspiration for Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Do you see Deborah as a role model having a specific influence on the way that Ginsburg thought of her role as a judge?
Yes, so that's a great question, Emma. First of all, Deborah is mentioned in the Book of Judges, and for Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the very idea that a woman is included within the judges, which were a bit more than just judges, they were really the rulers or the leaders back then, was formative. But also the fact that she was singled out and with her leadership attract others. It's not just that she was there alone, but she really attracted others. That was something that Ruth Bader Ginsburg always thought necessary. It wasn't just the trope of it takes a village. She always believed that her alone would not be enough. She needs a camp behind her. And that's why her first case arguing, in the Court of Appeals was actually a male's case. She thought that it would be much more appealing as, her husband, Marty, comes to her and said, there's a tax case I want you to read. And she goes, I don't read tax cases. And he goes, you should read this one. And so she comes to the court saying it's, to deny the husband the role of caretaker in the tax code, just because it's assuming that a woman will always do it, would hurt guys. And again, this idea of how smart she was in garnering some consensus behind her before she moved forward, I think was something that was very important to her, and ultimately, in my mind, led her to the United States Supreme Court.
Thank you, Doron. Another question for you. Is questioning authority or tradition inherently a Jewish value written in the Torah? And if so, how do you think RBG embodied that value?
I think that questioning authority is absolutely a Jewish value. I always give lectures on that because I love that. I think that Abraham argues with God about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and he says in words that are so impressive that no translation that I read properly translate them because they're too ominous. They're almost blasphemy. Chalila lecha, he says, Chalila lecha, ata tispe tzadikim rasha, hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat. I dare you, Abraham says to God, I dare you. Would you kill a righteous man together with an evil man? Is the justice of the entire universe shall not do justice? I think that, again, rabbis over the years took that away and claimed that only they can ask the questions. I, as a Jewish person, simply don't accept that. I think we should question authority, and that is actually the essence of Judaism, to question authority and to question our forefathers, not just for spite, but if we don't believe, for example, that it's okay to marry several women, to have a restriction of that by a rabbi saying only one man and one woman can marry, and one man and one man, and one woman and one woman, whoever they want. But from the dignity of man stems this principle of equality, that only one person can be. And yes, questioning authority is a great Jewish value. And I think that Ruth Bader Ginsburg never hesitated, because she always faced criticism. Not a single step she took was greeted with, oh, please, the door is open. Why won't you come in? Even in the movie, you can see in both movies, by the way, both the documentary and the Because of Sex, you can see that male opponents were standing in her way each and every time she tried to make a step, telling her that won't work. You will take women's rights 10 years back, and you will actually hurt women, and you're doing it for the wrong reason, and so on and so forth. She heard in her lifetime so many lectures of how wrong she is, that I think she had to do it her own way. She had to carve her own course, and she did it magnificently, I think. And just think about it. She was nominated to the United States Supreme Court at age 62. Her star really started to shine at age 70. This is the time where most people are leaving most of their work behind and turning to, grandkids or whatever. It is then that Ruth Bader Ginsburg really started to shine. And I think that publicly, I think that, personally, she did it from age 13. And I think that she really, truly enjoyed seeing her star shines during her lifetime, what many great geniuses see only after they pass. And so she was lucky enough. And you can see how happy she is to be invited to all those gatherings where people stand up in unison as she enters the room, and she's a diminutive, 5'3", and she's like, you see her eyes twinkle, and she's like, yes, I've done something, and now the doors are being opened. It's not for naught that she mentioned that very few doors are closed in her opening remarks here on Tzedek Tzedek Tildov, because in her lifetime, she had to burst open many of those doors that were closed to her and to others. So yeah, questioning authority, the quintessential Jewish value.
What a phenomenal answer. Thank you, Doron.
Oh, thank you.
So I'm going to switch gears slightly, because we have two questions from our audience on a slightly different topic, that of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's friendship with Justice Scalia. So one question about this is that Their friendship is really interesting. Scalia was a devout Catholic. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was obviously Jewish, and they were on different sides of the American political divide. But do you know if they ever revealed whether they had spirited religious discussions, the two of them?
I would assume they haven't. I don't know that, but I was assumed they haven't because Ruth, above and beyond being a brilliant justice, she was a very wise woman. She was a very wise woman. And she knew better, I believe, than to enter a religious argument with Scalia that waved his Catholicism right and left. Opera was good enough, and trips to India were good enough. And truth be told, Scalia, in a way, reminded her of Marty, because Scalia was this gregarious, fun-loving, sentence for every question, the heart of the party kind of a person. And she was attracted to that because obviously she was the complete opposite. And so on the court, she found her Marty in the most unlikely of colleague, Justice Scalia. And in Scalia, what shocked me was how proud he was in that friendship. He waved that everywhere. Ruth Bader is my friend. Ruth Bader, and he would bash her in his dissenting opinion. And she was so always very respectful towards everyone. But after that, they would meet and sing together in opera. And of course, there's an opera named after them, the Scalia Ginsburg opera. But I don't think they ever engaged in spirited or other religious discussions. But I know that he came to Seders. He was very respectful. They hosted the Scalias many a time, with Marty, of course, cooking. And what I would pay a lot of money, though, is to hear a conversation between Marty and Scalia, not between Ruth and Scalia. She probably sat there and laughed and enjoyed the show. But those two alter egos, if you will, of Ruth Bader Ginsburg talking, that would be for me. If I need to hear a conversation, that would be something I would really like to hear.
I know that there is a quote in the exhibition that you can see if you come see it in person or in a virtual tour, that Scalia will kill the meat and then Marty will cook it. So I've always found that relationship really interesting.
Yeah.
And then to spin off, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, he was a hunter and he was a cook. So that's pretty much accurate.
Then to spin off of that answer to our second question about Ginsburg and Scalia, do you see a precedent in Jewish values that might have motivated Ruth Bader Ginsburg to pursue a friendship with somebody so politically different from her?
That's an interesting question. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know that it's the Jewish tradition back in the old country was to always isolate, never make friends, because tomorrow they're going to attack you. But I think the old country's principle do not apply to America. And Jews always reached across the aisle. Rabbis walked with MLK in the Civil Rights March. I think of Avraham Heschel, of course, and Jews throughout the generation reached out across the political aisle and were on both sides of the political aisle to create consensus and friendship between the parties. But the friendship, I think, between Ruth and Antonine were not in my mind a political or a well thought out or a strategic move. They really liked each other. And the Supreme Court is known, by the way, not in 9 Scorpions in a Bottle and otherwise other books that were mentioning the tension and how the justices never actually visit each other. They sent clerks. So although you're like a room next to your colleague, you will never talk to them. You will actually send a colleague. So it's not like she has Breyer there, who's another Jewish judge, and later on Yelena Kagan and other justices that she would likely be more friendly with. They were really friends. They really liked each other. And I don't think it was a strategic move or otherwise. It was really because, as I said earlier, I suspect that she saw in him many of the things that she liked about her own husband. And that was the kind of person she liked, not necessarily a man or a woman, but the person she really liked. And Scalia was that on steroid. And they really enjoyed that friendship. And it was a real friendship. None of them have gained anything from that. They were both on the district circuit court. He was elevated first. She was elevated a few years later. And they lived in harmony in the Supreme Court ever after.
Fantastic, thank you. I have two last questions from our audience for you, if you have time for that, Doron.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's fun.
Our penultimate question today is, where is it written in Jewish tradition, that one is righteous if one passes away on Rosh Hashanah like RBG did? She also passed on the Shabbat. Does Judaism have anything to say about that?
Yes, absolutely. So thank you for that question. And I've written that in my notes. There is a special halacha for those who leave us on Rosh Hashanah on the eve of the new year, those people are allegedly are the ones that God wants the most. And so he brings them to him on Rosh Hashanah on the eve of the new year, allowing them to live the entire year prior and then bringing them up. In that respect, it's important to mention her last dying wish that would be that she would be replaced by a nominee from the new president, which of course was never honored by the then president. And indeed, for me, I think from now on, Rosh Hashanah will always be, a mixed feeling occasion, because as I was sitting down for Rosh Hashanah this year, I got it on my phone, the news that Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed, and I just couldn't believe, because I knew we're on the way to a major change in America, which would then lead to a predecessor that would be more in line with her views. And I was thinking of myself, who can be a Jewish woman of valor that can replace, get into the big shoes of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And then she passed in September, and I knew that although November is very only 8 weeks away, they will have someone in line that is not exactly in her mold, and that's exactly what happened. So it's very unfortunate that she left us so early, but yes, it is a Jewish tradition that God brings the best in the eve of Rosh Hashanah, and the passing in Rosh Hashanah is a great honor, and which she did.
Wow, thank you for that answer. And then for my very last question to ask you today, Doron.
Yes.
And this is a question about, not just about RBG, not just about Jewish wisdom, but about you. But what is the piece of Jewish wisdom that you learned from Ruth Bader Ginsburg as you were doing your research for this lecture that is going to be your biggest takeaway, that will inspire you the most going forward?
I really think that her thought of dissenting opinion, that what's today may be considered wrong or did not garner enough political power to overrule, would later become the law of the land. And it's so important. If you think, and this is a Jewish tradition, that's why it's in the Mishnah, going back thousands of years. If you think that the majority is wrong, don't just sit there and say, well, the majority is wrong, there's nothing I can do. Write it down, write an op-ed, go and lecture in the Maltz Museum, do whatever you can, and lead others to think that that gays should get married if they so choose, and that Title VII does protect LGBTQ members in the workplace, like she did in her last opinion. And so writing dissenting opinion and not conforming always with the majority just by virtue of a majority is a great Jewish value. And I think that Ruth not only preached that, but really practiced that to a perfection. And the Lily Ledbetter, that's why I finished with that, was such a beautiful thing, that she lost the battle, but won the fight in that few days after her dissenting opinion, Congress turns around and say, what the Supreme Court said makes zero sense. Women never know what our counterparts men earn, and therefore in real life, we should allow them to sue even years later if they only learn about that years later. So that's, for me, was the greatest lesson I took from the justice. Write your dissents, respect the views of others, but respectfully dissent, and in due course, that will become the law of the land.
Fantastic. Well, Doron, thank you so much for such an illuminating lecture, and thank you for taking the time to so thoughtfully answer our questions. And I'd also like to thank our virtual audience for joining us tonight from home for this program. We were so glad to have you with us today. You can join us again this spring for another one of our weekly programs, and you can find more information on these programs and anything else at the museum by visiting our website, www.maltzmuseum.org. And again, thank you, Doron. Thank you for such a wonderful lecture. And everybody have a really great evening tonight. Thank you again for joining us.